below zero a bunch. So yeah, it's pretty cold. We got 6 to 8 inches of snow. There we go. Okay, so this week we're talking about attitudes, chapter 5. Kind of a short chapter. Shouldn't take long, maybe. An attitude is a mental and neural state of readiness, organized through experience, exerting a directive or dynamic influence upon the individual's response to all objects and situations with which it is related. They are necessarily private. They are presumably formed through learning from a variety of experiences and influences. They are directly related to our actions or behaviors. An attitude is made up of 4 interconnected components: your thoughts, your cognitions, the affective responses, how you respond to them, behavioral intentions, what you expect to behave, how you expect to behave, and of course, how you actually behave. The attitude and the cognitions and feelings that support it can result in behavioral intentions and behaviors. An attitude is really a summary of an attitude structure, which consists of these interconnected components. A change in one component of an attitude structure might very well lead to changes in others. Because an attitude structure is dynamic, with each component influencing the other, your thoughts, how you intend to act, how you actually do act. Generally, the affective component dominates the attitude. When an attitude is evoked, it is always with positive or negative feeling, although the feeling varies in intensity. Our most intensely held attitudes, in particular, are primary affective in nature. Thus, you might think of an attitude as primarily a response emphasizing how you feel about someone or something, as primarily an evaluation of the person or object, but keep in mind that this evaluation is based on all the thoughts, intentions, and behaviors that go into the structure of the attitude. Our attitudes flow from and express our values. A value is a conception of what is desirable. It is a guideline for a person's actions, a standard for behavior. Attitudes are directed towards objects, people, and situations. Values are broad, abstract notions. Because values are more general than attitudes, there are few values but many attitudes. Just as an attitude can be seen as a system of cognitive, affective, and behavioral components, so a value can be seen as containing many interrelated attitudes. Milton Rokeach in 73 and then again in 79 argued that there are 2 distinct categories of values. He called one category terminal values. Terminal values, according to Rokeach in 73, refer to desired end states. Equality, freedom, and comfortable life, a salvation would all be end states. The other category he called instrumental values. Instrumental values flow from our preferred end states. They could be values such as being forgiving, broad-minded, and responsible. So the instrumental values lead to your terminal values, or at least they take in your terminal values. Implicit attitudes are activated automatically from memory. These tend to be outside conscious awareness, simple gut-level evaluations. Explicit attitudes are consciously held, careful and deliberate. Implicit and explicit attitudes may contradict each other. One way to measure implicit attitudes is with the implicit association test. The implicit association test pairs categories of items with positive and negative stimuli. For example, press a key if the stimulus is good or refers to women. Press a different key if the stimulus is bad or refers to men. Then reverse the pairings. Good plus equals men, bad equals women, and then repeat. The implicit attitude test assesses reaction time to see if the individual is faster at pairing good things with one category or the other. Seeing an unfamiliar stimulus, many times you can actually take this. There's a Harvard website where you can actually take the IAT. And what it's probably going to tell you is that your implicit attitudes are very distinct. Seeing an unfamiliar stimulus many times can lead to liking, unless the individual has initial negative reactions to it. Robert Zients identified the effect in 1968. The liking requires no knowledge of the object. Attitudes formed through mere exposure are often implicit. Neurologically different brain areas account for different kinds of mere exposure effects. A possible explanation for the phenomenon is familiar objects are unlikely to be dangerous. And this is known as the mere exposure effect. Familiarity does not breed contempt. Familiar faces, ideas, and slogans become comfortable old friends. Repeated exposures often work very well in advertising. The Marlboro Man, invented to convince male smokers that taking a drag on a filtered cigarette would enhance their manhood, lasted through a generation of smokers. When we walk down the aisle to buy a product, whether it is cigarettes or soap suds, the familiar name brand stands out and says, "Buy me," and we usually do. And there are pictures of the Marlboro Man. Why is he a cowboy? That's familiar. Actually, in that generation, there were a lot of cowboy shows on television. And of course, if he's wearing a white hat, that means he's the good guy. Strangely enough. And here's some more. Dos Equis, Progressive Insurance. And this is another insurance company, but I don't remember which one. A way we form attitudes is through direct personal experience. Direct personal experience has the power to create and change attitudes. Attitudes acquired through direct experience are likely to be strongly held and affect behavior. People are also less likely to be vulnerable to someone trying to persuade them to abandon the attitude. Direct experience continues to form and shape our attitudes throughout life. One study examined the effects of direct experience with government agencies on younger and older individuals' attitudes toward government. Attitude adjustment was just as common among older individuals as younger individuals. Attitudes can form through classical conditioning. A neutral stimulus paired with an object that naturally evokes an attitude response can cause the neutral object to come to evoke the same attitude response. Early research on prejudice showed that emotional components of prejudice could be classically conditioned. Classical conditioning of attitudes can occur below the level of conscious awareness, a process known as subliminal conditioning. When a behavior is rewarded, it is more likely to occur in the future. Receiving praise for holding an attitude is likely to strengthen the attitude. Attitudes can be shaped by observational learning. Individuals can learn an attitude by watching the way others are rewarded or punished as they interact with an attitude object. A reference group is a group to which we orient ourselves, a group with which we emotionally identify, a group whose standards we use to judge ourselves and others. Newcomb's Bennington College study showed that the effects of reference groups are profound. These are influencers, and I can't remember why I put these in here. These are influencers. I got to do this guy first because I keep forgetting what his name is. This is James Charles. He does male makeup. The rest of these guys I don't recognize. This is the most popular man in the world, strangely enough, and his name is Cristiano Ronaldo. He's Portuguese. He's a Portuguese soccer player. This is one of the Kardashians. I'm not sure which one. Kim, I'm guessing. Ariana Grande. This is The Rock. And this is Selena Gomez. The rest of these individuals I don't really recognize. That's pretty good, though. Until there's only 4 I don't recognize. And there are 6 that I do recognize. So let's talk about the Bennington experiment. This is Bennington College in the 1930s. Bennington College was an all-women's college. All of the professors were middle-aged males. The Bennington College experiment took place between 1935 and 1939. Theodore Newcomb decided to measure attitude changes of the women's freshman class over the course of a college career. The all-female student body at Bennington College tended toward affluent conservative families of New England. Bennington is in Maine. The faculty at the time were all male, fairly liberal individuals in their 30s. So what we're looking at is a group of affluent conservative females coming into a college, and they're being taught by fairly liberal male faculty in their 30s. Newcomb discovered that with education, most of the conservative adolescents became liberal young adults by graduation. So the education actually changed them. Not all the students became liberal, but the ones that changed were more likely to seek independence from their families. They were more socially secure. They had a higher self-esteem. They were less socially isolated. The liberal attitudes became very stable. Follow-up studies of the 1939 graduates in the 1960s and then again in the 1990s found that the women maintained their liberal orientation at 0.47, which is fairly high. And this is Martha Graham. She taught dance at Bennington College. Research shows that children may learn to act aggressively by watching violent movies or by seeing their friends fight. Observational learning occurs when we watch what children do, what people do, and then model or imitate that behavior. Observational learning does not depend on rewards, but rewards can strengthen the learning. People are more likely to imitate behavior that is rewarded. When there is discrepancies between what people say and what they do, children tend to imitate the behavior. Mass media play an important role in our society. Media heroes tend to be a very important influence in the development of our attitudes toward all manner of things. Politics, race, gender, violence, crime, love, abortion, and sex. Issues given extensive coverage in the media become foremost in the public's consciousness. Mass media can take many forms today, including streaming services, social media applications, internet-based websites, gaming consoles, and traditional television. With all these choices, our media consumption has slowly risen. In 2019, the average American spent a little over 12 hours a day viewing some form of entertainment. Expanded choices have led to shifts in how people consume entertainment. Older adults, above age 50, still primarily receive their entertainment via traditional television. However, younger adults, below the age of 35, spend their time consuming media via apps on their smartphones. Media use for children follows a pattern similar to that of the adults. Children are watching less traditional television and instead are streaming and using smartphones more than they did in the past. Overall, total media use in children age 8 to 18 accounts for about 7.5 hours a day on average. Enormous cultural changes have occurred over the past 50 years. Changes in sexual attitudes and behaviors are among the most noticeable and striking shift. Mass media has an enormous impact on sexual attitudes and behavior. Television programs and movies regularly mention topics such as teenage pregnancy, abortion, sexually transmitted diseases, and rape, whereas 30 years ago these topics were taboo. This sexual revolution has dramatically altered American culture, especially for women. Communication researchers have long argued that the topics most salient in the mass media tend to set the public agenda. This agenda setting occurs because the topics most prominent in the news shape the public's cognitions, increasing the focus on certain issues as opposed to others. Agenda setting exists on two levels. In first level agenda setting, the news media determine which stories are important enough to go on page 1 of the newspaper or end up on social media news feeds. Typically, editors select those stories they see as most important to head the news cycle. In second level agenda setting, the news media try to tell us how to think about news-related issues. This is done by presenting stories in a manner that alters our perceptions and emotions about events and people. There is an important factor that mediates the relationship between how a person or event is portrayed in the news and public perception. Emotion generated by news stories mediates this relationship through a process called affective framing. Positive portrayal leads to more positive perceptions and attitudes. A negative portrayal leads to negative emotion and a negative attitude. What is important about setting the agenda is that it seems to make people more sensitive to the issues contained in a news story. When this happens, the story becomes more salient, and everything about it is more easily retrieved by the individual. People who attend to the most salient topics in the media have strong opinions about those topics and are more likely to identify with others who believe the way that they believe. Select issues tend to fracture the public in several often antagonistic opinion groups. Does agenda setting really matter that much? Does it really have an influence over what people think? A meta-analysis by Luo et al. In 2019, analyzing the agenda-setting literature between 1972 and 2015, found a strong relationship between media agenda setting and public attitude. Some attitudes may have a significant genetic component. Moral attitudes seem to have an inherent component. Heritability refers to the extent to which genetics accounts for differences among people in a given characteristic or behavior. If the heritability of a characteristic is less than 100%, then other influences are involved. It makes sense that if we know something about a person's attitudes, we should be able to predict their behavior. People will act in a manner consistent with their innermost feelings and ideas. Attitudes appear to be, at best, only weak predictors of behavior. Social psychologists have concluded that a relationship exists but is more complex than they suspected. There are several reasons why attitudes aren't good predictors of behavior. When researchers looked at a specific attitude, they often were able to find a good relationship between that attitude and behavior. Another reason why attitudes and behaviors may not relate strongly is the fact that a behavior may relate to no more than one attitude. May relate to more than one attitude. I'm sorry. Edson and Fishbein in 1980 proposed the theory of planned behavior. This theory assumes that the best predictor of how we will behave is the strength of our intentions. The theory is essentially a three-step process to the prediction of behavior. The likelihood that individuals will carry out a behavior consistent with an attitude they hold depends on the strength of their intentions, which in turn is influenced by three factors: the attitude toward the behavior, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral controls. The first factor that influences behavioral intentions is attitude toward the behavior. We are talking about attitude toward the behavior, not toward the object. The theory says that the attitude toward the behavior is a better predictor of your actions than your attitude about general topic, because it affects your intentions. If you believe in exercise, will you exercise if you hate sweating? And this is something I run into all the time. I don't mind sweating. I worked on the farm when I was young, so I sweat a lot. But when I go to the gym, I'm the only one sweating. And people look at me funny because I allow myself to sweat. Most other individuals who are in the gym, lifting weights and whatnot, they take such long breaks between lifts that they never sweat. I don't take any breaks between my lifts. What I do is I will lift one muscle group, and then I'll go directly to a second muscle group, and I'll do a lift, and then I'll go to another muscle group, and on and on. And I do this constantly for about an hour, and I get a lot of lifts. And let's see, I can multiply this out. 12 times 4. So I'll do 48 lifts in an hour. That's how quickly I move from one to the other. I try to lift to exhaustion every time I lift. So I'll do 48 lifts in an hour. And so by the end, I'm pretty sweaty. Most people, though, they don't sweat. They don't want to sweat. I'm not exactly sure why. The second factor, subjective norms, refers to how you think your friends and family will evaluate your behavior. For example, you might think, all my friends exercise, and they will think that it is appropriate that I do the same. In this case, you may exercise despite your distaste for it. Your friend's behavior defines exercise as normative, and that is your standard. Behavioral control, the third factor, refers to a person's belief that the behavior he or she is considering is easy or hard to accomplish. A person will be more likely to engage in health-related preventive behaviors such as dental hygiene or breast self-examination if he or she believes that they can be easily done. And I'm not sure how easy that is. Hanging from your legs. Researchers reinforce the notion that emotions are crucially involved in turning attitude into behavior. Some of our attitudes is a crucial determinant of how we act. Strong attitudes are hard to change or stable over time, influence how we think, and shape our behavior. Weak attitudes, on the other hand, are easy to change and they seldom influence behavior. One function of a strong attitude is that it defines us. It tells people who we are. The theory that people are often non-rational actors is the view that humans are not always rational in their behavior, and their behavior can be inconsistent with their attitudes. Most of our behaviors are like that. We do them over and over without thought. People usually behave habitually, unthinkingly, even mindlessly. They make active decisions only when they face new situations. Thus, there is a good chance of inconsistencies between our attitudes and our behavior. In everyday life, we often run into a kind of automatic pilot. Our behavior becomes so routine and automatic that we are hardly aware of what we are doing. We are in a state of mind that Ellen Langer in 1989 termed mindlessness, one that involves reduced attention and loss of active control in everyday activities. Mindlessness occurs when we're engaging in behaviors that have been overlearned and routinized. In this state, we carry out the behaviors rigidly, according to a preconceived pattern and without thought or appraisal. Mindlessness is fairly common in our everyday interactions. We hold a number of attitudes without really thinking about them, which means there can be some interesting consequences once we are forced to think about them. Thinking about our attitudes and the reasons we hold them can sometimes be disruptive and confusing. The process of introspection, or looking into our own mind rather than just behaving, can have this effect. Why our attitudes aren't always rational? When an attitude is not particularly important to you, you may not have thought about the attitude object much or have expressed the attitude very often. So in this case, you don't really know what you think. When we don't have a clear sense of our goals and needs because people are often not clear about their goals and needs. When we are not clear about what we want to accomplish, then our behavior will be relatively unpredictable and might well be uncoupled from our attitudes. People like to hear and see information about that confirms their already existing attitudes. During the 2004 election cycle, conservatives exposed themselves to media outlets that supported their conservative ideals, such as Fox News, whereas liberals exposed themselves to outlets that supported liberal ideals, such as MSNBC. Generally, conservatives tend to gravitate to talk radio and Fox News, and liberals to PBS and Facebook. That's according to Wicks in 2014. Wicks et al., Does this selective exposure lead to political polarization? Research suggests that it does. People actively seek out information sources that support their political attitudes. These are known as echo chambers. This relationship is especially strong for people with already extreme political attitudes. A person's ideology is related to how they think and their motivations for action. Motivated social cognition means that a person adopts a way of thinking because it serves some psychological need and relates to a person's needs and motivations. Research shows that inflexibility and biased thinking are found whenever a person has an extreme ideological position, regardless of whether the person is liberal or conservative. Naive realism involves three intertwined processes. First is the belief that we are seeing the world objectively. Second, that other people who are rational will also see the world as we do. Third, if those others don't see the world as we do, then either they do not have the right information or they are not rational and harbor ulterior and bad motives. In essence, we are motivated to see ourselves as free of bias and objective, and we have what might fairly be called a bias blind spot. And this is known as naive realism. And that is the end of the chapter.